Hello everybody, I'm Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, and today we're going to announce our Stop Bullying Act. This is a very important act to me because basically what it does is it helps to combat bullying that young people face all the time, especially people in the LGBTQ community. Some statistics that are quite disturbing to me as a parent of 3 children is that 90% of LGBTQ folks have reported being bullied, and quite frankly people in many minority communities have been bullied as well, and they should know that they're not alone. There are a lot of people, unfortunately, that face this very disturbing behavior, but the purpose of this act today that we're introducing is to create state-level task forces modeled on Illinois that would be set up throughout the nation in different states to basically address the problem of bullying involving educators, parents, students, and other stakeholders to craft ways to deal with it in an effective fashion. And so at the federal level, we would create grant-making opportunities to incentivize states and get this off the ground. 13 states are doing it already. We want others to follow suit. So that's the purpose of today's event. I was bullied growing up. My children, unfortunately, have been bullied as well. And now with the advent of social media, it is pervasive. We have to put a stop to it. And that is the purpose of our initiative today. I hope that you'll join me in trying to combat bullying of all people, but especially LGBTQ folks who face a lot of hurdles in this regard. Because we are one community and we have to treat everyone the same. Equality is the watchword of my office. Whatever you need, please let me know. Thank you so much. The surge of humiliation, the heat of shame, the sting of tears, feelings so familiar to victims of bullying. Many of us, including myself, have experienced bullying. Though most of us felt we were bullied alone, the irony of bullying is that it is as ubiquitous as it is isolating. Unfortunately, the more bullying permeates our daily lives, the more inclined we are to overlook it, even at the highest levels of government. Some might say this is simply the way of the world, that bullying is a childhood rite of passage, a test of character. But while there is certainly something to be said for the trials and tribulations that we as Americans share, bullying should not be one of them, especially for our nation's most vulnerable. And one person I forgot to mention, Mark Walker, our state representative, is here. Thank you so much for coming. And I think this is something that he has focused a lot of attention on as well. As an immigrant, as I mentioned before, I have faced my fair share of bullying and otherizing. And unfortunately, even my children in 2019 have been otherized and bullied based on their heritage. But while my children and I have been blessed with the support system and resources to rise above bullying, many of our children cannot say the same. Many of our children cannot say the same. Bullying is not just an obstacle on the path to maturity. Its effects can be destructive, not just to the individual it hurts, but to the communities, the institutions where they learn, and the economies that bullying degrades. And as issues of suicide and gun violence in our nation's schools compound, we are beginning to see how bullying can even at times be deadly. And I have to mention that social media has been like the fuel that, thrown on this fire of bullying, allows it to propagate and spread in ways we've never seen before, not certainly when I was growing up. While 1 in 3 children in the United States have been victims of bullying and 70% have said they witnessed it, bullying is an even greater issue for those in the LGBTQ community. As mentioned before, 90% of LGBTQ students report being bullied, and 90% of transgender students report feeling unsafe in their communities. Hostile environments have deeply detrimental effects, not just on the health and well-being of our students, but also on their academic success and their ability to contribute to the economy. In fact, there was a study published last year on the long-term impact associated with childhood bullying victimization. This study found that adults who were frequently bullied as children have lower earnings, accumulate less wealth, and are at increased risk of unemployment and less likely to own property. Of course, they are also more likely to suffer from mental health issues like anxiety and depression. These findings contradict the conventional wisdom that bullying somehow builds character. I don't get that. I don't see how bullying builds character. I think it hurts people. Rather, we have to now address bullying for what it is, which is a public health crisis. That's me talking. It's a public health crisis. Illinois, unfortunately, sadly follows the trend of bullying growing nationwide. The vast majority of LGBTQ students in Illinois regularly hear anti-LGBTQ remarks, and most have experienced anti-LGBTQ victimization at school. Many LGBTQ students in Illinois report discriminatory policies or practices at their schools, and they don't have access to in-school resources. Thankfully, we have places like Kenneth Young Center. And thank you to Grace and Shrink. Can you give them a big round of applause? This is brand new. This is their stop-in center, which Leslie from my staff, she's in the back, and she made me aware of the fact that this has been set up so that more people have access to Kenneth Young's resources. So thank you to Kenneth Young for having this center. I'm deeply heartened at the state level. We have people like Mark Walker, we have people like Governor Pritzker, who've taken strong steps to resolve the bullying crisis in Illinois. For instance, with regard to LGBTQ students, they've set up a statewide task force. Basically a task force to address ways to reduce bullying and to implement solutions at the local level. And it involves educators, parents, students, and folks like Kenneth Young Center. That's essential, and it's, I believe, an effective way to deal with the LGBTQ bullying crisis. Now, what can we do nationally to emulate what's being done in Illinois and 12 other states? So 13 states out of 50 have set up these anti-bullying task forces, and so how do we make sure this spreads? That's why I'm introducing today the State Task Force Opportunity Program. It's called the Stop Bullying Act. And where's Grace? There she is, Grace in Washington, D.C. Give her a round of applause. She's worked really hard. Grace is on my legislative staff, and she has worked really hard with various not-for-profits, including the Gilson group. This is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, the Gilson group, which is a very powerful anti-bullying advocacy network for LGBTQ students to come up with this particular bill. The bill does the following. Basically, it offers incentives to states through the Department of Education to basically set up these state task forces in all 50 states. And why we believe this is so important is that we think that each state should set up its own task force. Each state has its own issues, and each state has its own set of educators, parents, advocacy groups, and of course students who know what works in their states. We at the federal government would provide some of the resources to get those up and running and to make sure that they actually implement the solutions that those task forces come up with. This is a critical issue for all of us to come together on, especially now. And we don't need to go into exactly why. But a lot of communities of color, minorities of all stripes, LGBT community, LGBTQ communities, for that matter, women, and everybody feel under pressure. We have to come together. This is a way for us to do so. It's a constructive measure. It's already been implemented in 13 states. It works. Now let's spread it far and wide across the country. So I want to say thank you so much for allowing me to come and introduce this particular measure here at the Kenneth Young Center. I can't think of a better place to do it. And now I'd like to introduce a couple people, each of whom are going to talk about different perspectives on this anti-bullying issue. One is Gray, and he is a Hoffman Estates High School senior. Gray, can you come up here and share your thoughts?
I'm a little nervous, I'm sorry. Sorry if I stutter. Good morning, Congressman Krishnamoorthi and all those attending. My name is Grayson, and I'm an 18-year-old trans male student who has fallen victim to bullying that had life-altering effects. While attending elementary and middle school, the biggest bully of mine was not only excused from his destructive behavior, but specifically sat at my table through 1st through 6th grade. This was due to the theory that my teacher's pet behavior would rub off on him. It did not, but the school did not care to handle this at the time. I now suffer from PTSD, a disorder commonly associated with war veterans, partially due to these instances and many, many more. In my efforts to report multiple bullies, I was told by different educators that me being out made me a direct target, and for me to continue to be publicly identifying as a member of the LGBTQ community made me choose to be bullied. Now, there are much more worse details that haunt me every day, but I will spare you those and let you imagine. If there were more studies, more understanding, and more resources, I would not have to stand before you today. I'm lucky enough to be able to speak on this issue, as many children have died due to the bullying students must endure, partially because of the lack of help and understanding. Bullying has changed and evolved into different menacing tactics that are simply unknown and misunderstood to those not directly experiencing it. If we were able to bridge the gap between educators and students that are currently being bullied, we could cut down on teenage delinquency, teenage dropouts, and most importantly, teenage suicide. Thank you for taking students' lives into your consideration.
And now, we'd like to have Sarah Schreiber from the Prevent School Violence Illinois group to come and share her thoughts. Sarah?
Thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Gray. You were powerful and concise. I'm aiming to be both of those things. So thank you to the Congressman, to Grace over there, to Representative Walker, who's standing over there, to the youth who are here in the front row where you should be, and of course up here, and a shout out to my former colleagues at the Alliance, Nat Duran and Shireen Payton. It's good to see you. Good to see you too. So I'm also nervous. So my name is Sarah Schreiber, and I'm the Executive Director of Prevent School Violence Illinois, or PSVI. And PSVI was born from a task force, very much like the one, in fact, very much like the one we're talking about today. PSVI works in close partnerships with students, families, teachers, administrators, community organizations, advocacy groups, and legislators to positively transform school cultures and climates, because it's within such environments that bullying cannot flourish. Almost 10 years ago to the day, December of 2009, I and a group of other attorneys came together to write a bill that would change the way Illinois addresses bullying and harmful aggression in schools, including bullying directed at lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and/or gender nonconforming students, which plentiful research documented, and still documents, were most often victimized. We called it the Prevent School Violence Act. That bill defined bullying for the first time in state law and enumerated categories of students who were vulnerable to bullying directed at various identities. Thus, the bill prohibited bullying against all students, and specifically named bullying related to sexual orientation, gender identity, race, skin color, religion, national origin, immigration status, socioeconomic status, etc. It was suggested to us at that point that in order to help pass the bill into law, we add a provision directing ISB, the Illinois State Board of Education, to convene a task force to study the phenomenon of bullying behavior, identify best practices for prevention, and write recommendations. To be very honest, my first response to the suggestion was cynicism. I felt at that point we knew all too well why bullying happens, its adverse consequences, and also what we need to do about it. So what we knew then and what we know now is to prevent bullying, schools must double down and create school environments where people are supported to develop social and emotional skills, where people are given opportunities to practice empathy, conflict resolution, self-awareness, social awareness, and decision-making, where people are held accountable for behavior that is harmful and learn why it is harmful and how to behave differently, where people are encouraged to take risks and make mistakes, and most of all, where people are accepted, no, loved, exactly as they are. So it is in those conditions that people can teach and learn, adults and students alike, and I didn't forget about academics, right? These are the conditions that permit students to flourish academically and in other ways. So the PSVA passed in 2010, the task force was convened, and its overarching recommendation was that to prevent bullying, schools commit to doing exactly what it was we thought schools should be doing, schools and communities. The recommendations were truly comprehensive. In fact, the approach the task force recommended was named Comprehensive School Transformation. These recommendations were steeped in SEL and directed schools to prioritize the voices of students, families, and teachers, whose voices were often left out of this work, support action research that would drive decision-making, provide professional development to all staff on issues that impact students' daily lives like sexuality, gender, racism, and poverty, rewrite policies, and transform discipline. The task force laid out a progressive, if not idealistic, set of blueprints for anyone who cared about students to use to make change. But what the task force also did was catalyze the first efforts at implementation. And so I appreciate what you're saying, because task forces can be very powerful, can put out powerful recommendations, but they're only as powerful as their implementation. I cannot emphasize this enough, how important it is for the task force to pass the torch to ready and willing community partners like PSVI, the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance, to schools and districts in Illinois willing to take on this charge, and many, many other partners. So what I really want to share today is what can happen after a task force is convened and puts out recommendations and then supports implementation. So just a few things. Very, very fortunately, PSVI and a number of partners were able to pilot the recommendations, this comprehensive set, with 5 middle schools in Illinois in broad-ranging parts of the state: Peoria, DeKalb, Elmwood Park, Cicero, and Hillside. Very, very different schools, different sizes, different demographics, all of that. Because what we believed, and what turned out to be true, is that when you implement these recommendations, even in all of these various settings, because we're really drawing from the expertise of the people in the community, including the youth or led by the youth, that it works, that it can work in any setting. And what we found after just 2 years was that we meaningfully reduced bullying, victimization, and perpetration more than a number of the leading bullying prevention programs you can buy in a box. And it was all because we were able to support and elicit the expertise of the people in those communities. We have also learned from being able to do research with our research partners at UIC, we've learned a lot, and we've learned that there's still a tremendous amount of work to do. We've learned that students often do not intervene because they don't know whether other students are just joking. We've also learned that adults cannot discern the difference between bullying behavior and normative peer conflict. So I'm happy to say that having that conversation alone was a powerful intervention in bullying in schools. We have also learned from a research project, or a more recent research project with LGBT young people, that there are discernible connections between their victimization in schools and their punishment that is related to their victimization in schools. So let me say that again, because it's really concerning. And that is that young people who are being bullied, and these are LGBT young people, because there are ineffective interventions, and often because the adults unfortunately make things worse, those students are left to fend for themselves and to cope in any way that they know how. And often those coping strategies violate the school codes of conduct. And then those students are punished, and they're punished in punitive and exclusionary ways that aggravate what's already going on. We also learned from the same research that LGBT young people are very often bullied by the adults who are charged with their care in schools. And I mean bullied in a sense that ignoring the problem, blaming the victim, all of that, but I also mean bullying that is incredibly explicit and direct, including sexual harassment. And that most often, at least in our study, these adults were never held accountable. So all of this to say there's a lot of work to do, and I'm excited that we're reinvigorating the work in Illinois, and that we can share with other states what we've learned works. So when I consider your bill, I envision 50 task forces like the Illinois School Bullying Prevention Task Force that existed in 2010, and Governor Pritzker's Affirming and Inclusive Schools Task Force that's hard at work right now. And even more importantly, I envision 50 beautiful sets of blueprints that people like us, including led by students and families and teachers, to use together to address bullying and violence by creating schools where people thrive, all people, youth and adults, because they are welcomed, respected, and loved for being exactly who they are. So thank you for introducing this bill. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to continuing to work together.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sarah. It's good to see you as well, a former board member of the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance, like myself. So as Sarah mentioned, and as the Congressman mentioned, this is very important work. And I think that one of the things that was stated that we can't overemphasize is the need for communities to come together. So you're all in the space of Kenneth Young Center and our LGBTQ Center. And this division is community collaboration. Because the other thing that we know from research is that we can't ask youth to handle this all by themselves. And we certainly can't ask them to get better without them being at the table and part of it. So I'd also like to thank and acknowledge our Youth Advisory Council, who is sitting here in the front row, as well as Molly, another pioneer. I had to point out Molly's picture. I'm like, oh, we know you. We appreciate it. And then also Gray taking the time out from his day to come and to tell his story. This has been very challenging. It's anxiety ridden. It can be triggering for many people, but you have to keep in mind that this is something we cannot handle alone. And again, like the name of the division, community collaboration, Kenneth Young Center is interested in all of you all joining us in this process, joining us in addressing bullying in our community, helping to change the culture, as Sarah talked about, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a cultural norm and a cultural shift, and policies help to do that. One of the things that Sarah did mention that came out of that was the Illinois Youth Survey. We added questions to that survey to ask about bias-based bullying and bullying for individuals based on the way they look or perceived sexual orientation or identity or expression. And then in 2018 was the first time the indicator was on there that said, are you male, female, transgender, or I'm not sure. And so data is very powerful. One of the things that I do for Kenneth Young Center is grant writing. And if you can't identify and measure what's going on, people aren't necessarily interested in putting dollars towards those strategies. So I also look forward to this task force, and I'm hoping that it helps to build the local data that we have, as well as the statewide data, so that we can address this. But more importantly, as mentioned in the bill, it also talks about all of the different partners that have to come together. And so I consider all of you as our partners in this effort, and that you're here in this space. I appreciate all of the elected board members from the various school boards who are here, as well as the superintendents in the room, because that definitely tells us that this is something that you also believe in, that you know that this is an issue. This is not just about one person, but this is about our community. This is about our youth. This is about us. So thank you again for coming today. I appreciate it. And I think the Congressman will also take some questions. We might have time for a few.
Sure.
Is that correct?
Sure.
So does anyone have any questions?
Easy ones.
Easy ones, please. Hi, yes. Chelsea, Lala Berthe from Live for Lolly.
Hi, Congressman Krishnamoorthi. Thank you so much for doing this. My question is, have you guys actually been able to identify where the funding is coming from for the bill, or are you still working on that?
We're working on that piece. Yeah, as you know, the Department of Education is under a lot of pressure right now in the Trump administration. That being said, I think that this is something that's, I think that there would be bipartisan support for it because, I think bullying has become an issue that transcends partisan lines. And I think that it's something that already a lot of states are doing. And so it's basically taking a good idea that's already working and spreading it, around the country. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Keith Packley. I'd just like to publicly thank you, Congressman, for your help in keeping the Kenneth Young Center on the radar, and always will attend our events, and we appreciate that, just as someone from the community.
Thank you. Do you have anything more to add? Thank you. Well, that's an easy question. Thank you so much for that. I think that, I can't say enough good things about Kenneth Young Center. And we actually had a roundtable this past summer on this particular issue. And that's really what helped to get our juices flowing. I think Darren was there, Darren Reesberg, our state, the chairman of ISB, was there. And he's done a great job on this particular issue, and so we were collaborating with him, my office was, and that's how we came up with this bill. So I want to also give a shout out to Darren, who couldn't be here because of another conflict, but ISB is doing a great job on this particular issue. Any other? Oh, hi, sir.
Good morning. Thank you again for being here, your involvement. What would be one of the key areas that you would focus on? Because as you stated that you like Illinois to be a template for the other 49 states. So if I'm from another state, what would be so attractive to this journey that we're on?
I think the appeal of this idea lies in, I think, what Sarah was saying, in that we're involving local community partners. Each state has its own kind of unique challenges. And so I think that to the extent that we are allowing states to decide for themselves who should be at the table, I think that's really important. And also allowing them to come up with different strategies, because one strategy might not fit all. And so allowing them to, for instance, do these pilots to assess whether their strategies work, and then maybe expanding them to include more schools throughout the state might be one way to go. But one thing that I'm hoping that each task force includes are students. That's essential because we as parents or adult partners may kind of come up with strategies that don't really make sense from a student's perspective. And I have to say, anything that doesn't address the social media issue will not work. Because as you know, there's a conversation happening all the time on social media that sometimes goes outside of what I'm talking about me maybe, I just don't track. And so we have to address that, because if we don't, then nothing else will work, in my humble opinion, with regard to bullying. One other issue I just want to address, which is I believe very much that if we can successfully deal with the bullying issue with regard to LGBTQ folks, then we will get a leg up on bullying with regard to everybody else.
Yes.
This is... It's so pernicious and insidious with regard to LGBTQ folks. If we can get our arms around this, we will really be able to deal with the bullying that happens with regard to a number of other communities that face it. And so that's why, in part, I'm focused so much on this particular issue right now.
Thank you.
Yes, we have a student question. And can you introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Faith Massey. I work with my peers are here for Youth Advisory Council.
Excellent.
My question is, the bill regarding the bullying, what is something you would like us to see and to encourage us to do inside the schools?
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate the question. I need you to share this with more and more of your peers, and also your peers in other states. It's really important that they bring to their member of Congress or their senator this bill and say, hey, where do you stand on this? We think it's a good idea. We would like for you to co-sponsor this bill. And that's what Grace, when we go back to Washington, she's going to start pushing other offices to kind of get on this bill as a co-sponsor. And the more co-sponsors we have, the more likely it is that we can actually get it taken up for a vote in the committee of jurisdiction, and then ultimately, hopefully, get it through the House. These things take time, but I can't think of a better group of people who are more empowered to actually get it done than youth, quite frankly. And whether it's on gun control issues or on bullying issues, we need you to lead the way. Thank you. Thank you. Getting the hook. So, well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you for taking precious time out of your days to be here. But I can't think of a more important issue, quite frankly, for the future of our youth than making sure that they feel safe. And I really hope that next time we meet, we'll have even more good news to report on this bill. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and spreading the word on this issue. So thank you again.